So this chapter, second chapter, is on the global status of early warning systems. So it's clear now that early warning systems save lives. This is about a central instrument in the development, monitoring and strengthening of people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems. So MEWS are a central instrument in the development, monitoring and strengthening of people-centered MEWS. I didn't say it right, but anyway, the Sendai Framework Monitor SFM aims to assess member states' continuing progress on Target G. Under Sendai Framework for Monitoring, you have several targets. This Target G is substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems, MEWS, and disaster risk information and assessments to people by 2030 through robust, timely, well-defined and internationally comparable official data. There are many cases where climate change impacts added to an already boiling situation and make make conflicts begin with the trigger from climate change, like water problems or agriculture, drought. And so climate change impacts may not be the ultimate cause of conflicts, but many times they may not be the proximate cause, they may not be the immediate cause, but they can sometimes be the last straw that breaks the back of a camel. So if there is a drought going on, food prices go up. You remember the Arab Spring and so on, and the Rohingya issue, the Sudan issue. Everywhere climate change plays out. So vulnerability in this sense has to be thought of as collective vulnerabilities, the multi-hazard of the social systems themselves, the cascades, have to be protected against as well. So the overview of Target G here, Sendai Framework Global Target. Target G substantially increased the availability of and access to MEWS and disaster risk information and assessment to the people by 2030. So MEWS pillars 1 to 4 and Target G1, so that's compound G2, G5. These are kind of the way the Sendai framework is organized, but I won't go into the detail. The number of countries that have MEWS, so pillar 1 is risk knowledge. Target G5, you can map it on to SFM targets using the report. Number of countries that have accessible, understandable, usable and relevant disaster risk information and assessment available to the people at the national and local levels. So Sendai Framework Global Target G, again, Pillar 2 is on observations and forecasting, Pillar 3 is on warning, dissemination and communication, and Pillar 4 is preparedness to respond. We saw this as the important components of a effective, efficient and useful early warning system. So pillars 1 to 4 here, descriptions are given, number of countries that have multi-hazard, so MEWS, number of people covered, percentage of local governments having plans, and percentage of population exposed to or at risk from disasters, and so on. So good news, cumulative number of countries reporting the existence of multi-hazard early warning systems has gone up, a score greater than 0. You can follow up on what these numbers mean, but here number of countries reporting existence of MEWS is from 2015 to now. You've gone from 50 to more than double at 101 by 2022. Hopefully the number keeps increasing and nobody is dropping out once they are already in the system of MEWS. Sendai Framework Target G reported countries and areas. So it's interesting because depending on what you look at, some countries are prioritizing differently and reporting differently as well. So this is reported having MEWS. So you can see, if you look at Global South, of course rich countries like the US and European Union and Australia are there, but surprisingly not Canada. South America has lots of countries reporting having Muse on the western edge, but somehow all of this must be, I don't know, you can look it up which country that is, and either they did not have Muse or they didn't report to the global framework. Okay, good news. India and this neighborhood reports. Pakistan doesn't have or doesn't report. China, surprisingly, is not engaged, even though we know that it has very good Muse as well. Africa coverage, you can see, is encouraging, but there are lots of issues with lots of countries not having Muse at all. Okay, so you can see East Timor and New Guinea and so on. So if you look at various pillars, then disaster risk knowledge and management, the countries which appeared here don't necessarily appear here. Okay, and if you look at detection, observation, monitoring, analysis and forecasting, India appears because you cannot really do early warnings without having this. Warning, dissemination and communication, somehow India disappears, but I know that there is a lot of warning, dissemination and communication happening. So read the report carefully as to why this is looking this way. Preparedness and response capabilities, it appears here. So in that sense, you can say India has an incomplete Muse, but in reality, it's made great progress. I'm talking about India because I've been sitting here for 6 years. But you can see that Africa in general remains very spotty, and this shows up in terms of number of deaths and climate impacts and so on and so forth. Contribution of the pillars to the Muse improvement, where are they coming from? Pillar 1, 26% disaster risk knowledge. Pillar 2, detection, observation, monitoring, analysis and forecasting, only 12%. This is a very critical aspect, so this should be a big part of it, because sustained observations also help with tracking trends and so on. 46% comes from warning, dissemination and communication. You have to think carefully whether this is effective if these are not doing great. So you have to make sure that everything is working well. And of course, preparedness to respond, 16% come from this global status report. Spotlight on tracking of hazardous events and losses and damages. You remember loss and damage from other podcasts is a mechanism that is now it's been discussed for a long time, but now it's evolving about helping developing countries, low income countries, least developed countries, small island states and so on dealing with climate impacts. Okay, so UNDRR and WMO and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, are collaborating to develop a new tracking system for hazardous event and disaster losses and damages. Besides tracking and recording impacts of events, the new system will build on the WMO approved cataloging hazardous events methodology to better understand hazard impact linkage and cascading events. The tracking system will help tailor EWSs at the local level and assess its effectiveness over time through the reduction in disaster impacts. So early warnings always have to be hyperlocal, risks are hyperlocal, impacts are hyperlocal, the categories of hazards are hyperlocal and so on. So that's important. Similarly, the International Organization for Mitigation and the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center are advancing on the piloting of disaster displacement indicators linked to the Sendai framework to build government capacity to collect, report on and analyze disaster impacts. Okay, so here are a couple of more maps that provide some information. This is global map showing the latest status of compliance with the Global Basic Observation Network GBON for surface, upper air observations. Areas in dark red are far from meeting the GBON requirements. So now you try to map it. So Canada says it has a very good GBON. US is far from meeting the GBON requirements, even though it has an early warning system with preparedness and observation, monitoring and so on and so forth. They are inadequate, and it's the same for upper air high resolution density. So now there is some evidence that hail is increasing and somehow India here shows up as having a good upper air high resolution density, maybe with satellites and so on, but here for surface standard density it is lacking or far from meeting GBON requirements. So these give you a good sense of where there is improvement needed, progress needed, attention needed, investment needed, expertise needed, help needed, aid needed, and so on. Okay, so spotlight impact based early warnings. Impact based early warnings are based on the output of IBF. Here we go again, I forgot what IBF is. You know, you read all these things and then you just don't. IBF, I forgot my alphabet. IBF is impact impact based forecasting is IBF. Okay, I should have guessed that, but I'm getting old. Okay, so where was I? IBF sees a move away from the traditional approach of forecasting the hazards in terms of thresholds of heat waves, extreme rainfall, and so on. For example, the amount of rain falling in millimeters or strength of wind in knots or kilometers an hour. Instead, it moves to predicting what the impact of the hazard will be by taking into account the additional information relating to vulnerability and exposure of people, livelihoods, and assets, noting that these vary in space and time. So if risks are hyperlocal, then impacts will be hyperlocal, so forecasts have to worry about warning people about the potential impacts and not just saying heat wave is coming, but to say what the heat wave may do in your area. Ultimately, collaborations bring together different types of skill, knowledge, and material resources needed to collect, analyze, and manage the required data, develop and interpret relevant forecast information, and link these forecasts to early actions. Series of steps towards implementing IBF and IBF warning services are outlined in a report. The risk matrix that we will look at is a key element of IBF and IBF warning systems and linked directly to communication of warnings. It's important to note that thresholds still have a role to play in IBF process, but they may not be communicated explicitly unless specifically requested. So if there is a heat wave coming and it does nothing and doesn't kill anybody, it doesn't damage crops, doesn't affect businesses, then does it matter? So impacts are critical. Okay, so here is the severe weather forecasting program implementation. Severe weather forecasting SWFP. You can see that global contributing centers in red dots, regional centers in blue dots. India appears in both, and RSMCTC, tropical cyclone things that are located in oops, let me make sure, RSMC yes, I jumped it. Regional Specialized Meteorological Center. Okay, that's tropical cyclone focused. TC is tropical cyclones, and so on. So you can see there is you can say there is fairly good coverage in some places, but not so good in other places. Like here, this one somehow doesn't show up, but it is probably not reporting or not participating in global programs, which is not so uncommon for the US. Global networks and mobile coverage, again, very good in some places, but not so great in other places, even in a rich country like this or this. And this is all lots of deserts here and so on. Okay, so there are scales involved that you can follow up, but I'm just showing you what are the things that need to be tracked. Active anticipatory action frameworks around the world. Anticipatory action framework under development in 2022. Number of people evacuated per year has increased over the years. Is it because more people are being protected and early warning actions are more active? Probably that's the case. Okay, so the keys here, you have cold waves, conflicts, conflict and violence, dry spell, floods, heat waves, storms, tropical storm, volcanic ash, wildfires, winter storm, and so on. So many hazards are covered. Number of people protected through evacuation has increased. Asia Pacific 1.1 billion, Europe and Central Asia. Africa is doing fairly poorly. Americas and Arab states are in there as well as tiny dots. Okay, so this is really annoying, isn't it? This happened before, but with the upgrade it went away, but now it's come back. Okay, something is sticking with my keyboard. Probably I need to clean up the keyboard as well. Okay, so let's leave this here. The global status then of early warnings: lots of progress, a lot of good signs of good plans in the works, but a lot of people still exposed to hazards without early warnings. So we have to focus on that. Okay, we'll come back and talk next about early warnings for all initiative. Okay.